Our God, our most righteous Father, as we gather here this morning, halfway through the year, let us be guided by your footstep, your handshake, your mindset. Anoint us from the crown of our head to the sole of our feet with anointment of understanding. Educate us the way you want us to educate your people. Create in our mind legislative framework that we can now copy it and paste it to the wall for all to see. Lord, in Jesus' precious and holy name, guide our footstep, guide our health in your way. Amen.
Thank you. All right, members. There are a few issues that we'd like to clear up. We have the Ministry of Labor today. There's a list of what we had asked the ministry to report on. That's on your agenda. What is not on the agenda, there is the National Council for Senior Citizens, the Golden Age Homes, Family Services Unit, and the Council for Persons with Disabilities. The question is whether we are going to take these issues, and if there are any questions on any other areas, we can take them today. Hopefully we can finish the Ministry of Labor today, and if not, we would bring them back to finish next week. The next item on our agenda, which had been sent out from before, while we had seen the Ministry of Education, it was to deal with specific areas, which we had done, Caribbean Maritime Institute, HART, etc. But the other areas of education, we had indicated we were going to look at them. We had not. The report has come in. So I'm going to suggest that next week, all things being equal, if we finish labor today, that we take education and complete education. And I think one of the things that we probably need to look at is, members, there's a discussion taking place right now about the college, the Edna Manley School for the Arts, that there are some issues there, and how they're dealing with these matters. The question is whether or not we would have them as well to have a discussion on it. So we have Ministry of Education. I think we will finish Ministry of Education next week and take the week off. After the third week of this month, we will not meet, and we would resume next month with the Ministry of Local Government as per our agenda. So if members agree in principle, if there are any issues, we can discuss them. But in principle, that's what we're planning as the next few weeks, so that the clerk can send out and request necessary information. The one thing I would say, members, just for the record, I had a discussion with Ms. McCarthy, who is the coordinator of all committees. There are a number of other committees that want to meet, and a number of committees, it's joint select as well as sessional. What I have agreed to on your behalf, members, is that we will meet the first 3 weeks of the month and we will take off the 4th Wednesday, so that we can plan in future, and they will also be able to slot in the other committees that need to meet on the 4th Wednesday. So I think, Sawita, you had wanted to.
When would we want to invite them?
Well, as I said, we have Ministry of Labor today. If we're able to finish Ministry of Labor, next week we would take Ministry of Education to finish it.
Right, but the reason why I ask is that on a program this morning I heard that they will be having an inquiry on the 20th
A what?
An inquiry,
Into
a hearing into
Uh-huh.
the incident.
Yes.
They will be having a hearing on the 20th with the complainant and
Okay.
the accused person.
But
So maybe I think maybe it will be, and if it will be wise for us to have them come in before.
well, let me tell you what my suggestion is, member. We had the Ministry of Education sent this report. We would see them. I only bring it up in so much as it is an issue. And I think what we have to do as a parliamentary oversight committee is, ours is not really, once there is an inquiry that is going to go to you know, to some arbitration or to some decision or investigation. That's not our point. I think what we need to look at is the procedures in place. How do institutions, whether they are in education in general, how do schools, how do the colleges, how do they deal with the different issues of complaints? I think it is more to look at the systems and how and what they're putting in place as the correct procedures to follow when these things are in place. So ours is to look at the efficiency. So I only say it from the point of view that this thing has become a problem. My understanding is that it is something that has been going on for some time. And I think that from our perspective, what we would be looking or seeking is how or what are the rules that govern how they are supposed to act in these circumstances. So I'm not saying that ours is a job to go and try the case, not at all. But generally speaking, I think given once we see issues arising, ours is to work on putting in place recommendations to Parliament that we will not see these things happening in other institutions are happening again. What is being put in place preventative to prevent these things from happening? So I only put it from that perspective. Yeah. I didn't mean that we were going down to do the investigation.
Okay.
All right. So members, I think we are. Yes. So that is it. All right. So members, I have apologies for absence from Mr. Phillips and Ms. Daly. Can we get confirmation for the minutes of the meeting held on May 29th? All right, move Mr. Stewart, seconded Mr. Campbell. Matters arising? If there are no matters arising from the minute, I would ask them to bring in the team from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. members, before we proceed, could we please welcome, we have, and I know that Member Dunn has a special interest here, we have 80 students and 4 teachers from the St. Mary Technical High School, and we have, yes, and we have 31 students and 2 teachers from Queens High. So we'd like to welcome them to their parliament. Okay, so members, I'd like now to welcome the team from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Welcome to Parliament. And Pierce, I would give you the opportunity to introduce your team, and well, you can introduce the team, and then what we would do, we have the list of programs here. What I could probably do is we'll go through one by one, and if members have some questions, we'll take it from there. And if there's anything you'd like to say as an overview, I'll give you the opportunity. So, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, committee members, students, and everyone present this morning. Let me introduce the team. To my right is Audrey Dare Williams, Chief Technical Director. To my left, Mr. Amin Fagan, with the National Insurance Scheme, Acting Director in charge. Further to his left, Ms. Deborah Patrick Gardner, Chief Technical Director assigned in the ministry, and I don't know the other persons are behind, but I'll just call the names. Tamar Nelson, CTD, Jamaica Productivity Center. Mr. Jason Anderson, Principal Financial Officer. Ms. Hope Fisher, Director, National Insurance Fund. Ms. Andrea Miller-Stennett, Director, Overseas Employment Program. Ms. Diane Spence, Director, Social Intervention Program. Ms. Elsa Marks Willis, Director in charge of PATH, and Mrs. Andrea Patterson Morris, our Director in charge of Planning, Research, and Monitoring, and Ms. Gillian Corodos. Yes, Ms. Gillian Corodos, Director, Industrial Relations and Allied Services. Sorry, Ms. Lisa Ann Grant. I don't have her on my list. Ms. Lisa Ann Grant, Director in charge of the Work Permit Program in the ministry. As an opening, Chairman, I'll just say very briefly that the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, in keeping with the mandate of modernizing government, that we have embarked upon a number of initiatives aimed at improving our services. We are aware that as a service ministry, we are not where we ought to be. And so this is one of the reasons we are really focused on improving our services, and we will be doing it a lot primarily through modernization and through the use of technology. However, Mr. Chairman, in my humble opinion, we are on the right track in terms of improving our services. And the week before last, members of the committee, there were some members of the committee who were here who in fact recognized some of the improvements that have been taking place in the ministry. And I think I won't go any further. I will just respond to if there are any questions, or do you want me to go through the report?
Well, no, I think what we can do is take the report. We'll go by
Right,
section.
okay.
Before we proceed, though, yes, there is a line of thought that one of the things that the Ministry of Labor should be doing is sort of more focusing on and trying to make the whole labor market more efficient. How do we operate more to sort of coordinate the Ministry of Labor with the learning institutions, with different areas? What are the needs of the labor force? How do these filter back into government to affect the training programs, etc., to work more, Ministry of Labor and Social Security, to work more with regards to sort of fashioning the sort of modern, efficient labor environment that we want for these times. Is it something that you are addressing, looking at this point in time?
Yes, yes, Chairman. It is something we are and have been addressing. Or we have a labor market information system, and we have the electronic labor exchange portal. Now, with that system, Chairman, we have been, I'm sure persons here would have heard me speak about our drive to get our graduates registered. And not just the graduates from our training institutions, universities, and so forth, registered on that system so that we can know what is being produced in the labor market, meaning what the institutions are training and the availability of skills out there. We have also been working with employers to have them registered on the system to be able to post the vacancies, because it is that information that helps us to get data on what is happening in the labor market. Now, that is an ongoing process. Added to that, Chairman, the ministry, over the years, we have been tabling studies. Last year, we tabled a study which looked on the labor market and what are the jobs in demand. And next month, well, later this month, in another 3 weeks, we will be tabling another study which is looking at what are the hot jobs. And that is, we go out in the field, right? We interview employers, we look on what the trends are in the market and the demand. This is a study, Chairman, that we have been, or these studies that we have been doing, we have been sharing them with the various institutions, training institutions, so that, and the general public, because it makes no sense persons paying money to study an area where in another few years there will be no or very little demand for those skill sets in the future. And so this information, it's not just for employers and government, but it's also for the average person, students, to use it to inform, to help inform the decisions that they make. So yes, Chairman, it is something we're doing. We have established a number of MOUs with various training institutions, the Chamber of Commerce in Montego Bay, St. Anne, Mandeville, the Jamaica University, Heart Trust. So we are working in that direction.
Okay.
And I encourage persons, Chairman, the website is being revamped and will be relaunched. And you remember when I was here last, I spoke about the app that we're coming out with, because we recognize that the labor market, the young persons of today, they want things at their fingertip. So we are coming out with an app that will be launched on the 17th of June.
Okay. I say this because another side of the coin is, and we'll get there later, you're also in charge of work permits. And that includes a number of people who come into the country. And from time to time, we go through periods where you have a lot of development taking place. Maybe hotels, whether they're BPOs, just different areas, construction, and then the persons who are going in. Now, you would have persons in your organization that can do an analysis of what the needs will be. You know, when persons are building a hotel, they apply for incentives and they say we are going to employ so many people, X, Y, Z. These things filter back to you. And then you are seeing what may come at you in terms of work permits. And if you find that at a certain period of time you're looking at you're looking at giving work permits for persons to do, I don't know, tiling of marble, you know, you're 20 persons, or you don't have enough electricians of a type, or whatever it is that you may be getting work permits for, or you are looking at these developments coming that are going to need persons. The question is how you as a Ministry of Labor would coordinate with education and others to then train those persons, because normally we have a couple of years of, you know, from the big developments. How are we looking? Do you have in place the systems to allow so that young people are able to say, well, look, I know this is going to happen in my area, let me start preparing myself because opportunities will come. What happens is that they don't know, and then one day something opens, and then they see a lot of people coming from outside to fill these jobs. And then, you know, you get that sort of sense of it's not a Jamaica for them. So I'm wondering if you see yourself as having a central role there, and if there's some coordinated effort in this regard.
Well, Chairman, I see us having an important role there. We do have a system in place. It is not a perfect system, but we do have a system in place. It used to be in the past more disjointed, I would say, but we have been working a lot closer with JAMPRO for them to be able to feed us with that information beforehand, because many times when an investor is coming to Jamaica, it doesn't happen overnight, right? That investor, whether it be through JAMPRO or some other area, is interfacing with an arm of government, and most times it's JAMPRO. JAMPRO is not the only person, but most times it's JAMPRO or tourism. It may be a tourism-related project. So we are working a lot closer with JAMPRO for them to be able to feed us that information beforehand. What are the projects in the pipeline coming up, right? So that we can have that information and use that to help us to determine what work permits we should be granted, and how Heart Trust probably needs to increase its training for a particular area. You mentioned tilers and so forth. It's a perennial thing, right? So that's also one of the reasons why we want the Heart graduates and all the graduates registering on our system, because when an investor comes and says, well, we need to hire, I need 30 work permits because I can't find the persons locally, we would have that database which says, here are a pool of persons. I can't guarantee you that they're not working, but here's a pool of persons based on what is in this database, right? I know that that skill set is available locally. And so that's one of the reasons we are actively promoting the labor market information system, but we are working a lot closer with JAMPRO.
Okay, thank you. I think, yes, at the end of the day, I think we're the same philosophical point. Our suggestion, I suspect, when we report to Parliament, we will look at it, but I think the extent to which we can coordinate and plan a little more with our with especially the foreign and local investments, and how we deal with labor and all the other issues. Because one of the things that I always find, and I spoke to the Planning Institute about it when they were here, I'm still a little surprised at the amount of investment we get and it not having the impact that we would have expected it to have on our economic growth numbers. And I think part of it is that we may not be integrating as well as we should, and that comes to planning. So
Yeah.
I don't know that we can go much further with the discussion, but certainly you made an important point. The extent to which JAMPRO, the various line ministries, whether it's industry and commerce or technology or tourism, etc., are involved in this process, and just even once or twice a year coming together to look at what the plan is for the year and how you can incorporate the rest of government into this is going to be very important.
And Chairman, if I may add, before we close out this area, we are, as a matter of fact, a delegation will be going to Canada next week on a study tour to look at their work permit system, because some of us may be familiar with the Canadian system, where Canada looks at the labor market and what's happening in the labor market to help to determine what categories of workers and so forth. And so we are actively looking at that. It's one of the work permit project, the modernization of the work permit project is one of the key projects being financed by the Ministry of Finance for modernizing and revamping totally the new system. How we envision it will be linked to our labor market information system, which will be linked to our border control system and all of that. So it is in the pipeline, Chairman.
I'm very happy to hear that. And I mean, as I said, we're looking at the modernization of our labor force and the extent to which you can be interventionists. I hope that after this group go to Canada and visit, that they will actually come back and that we will see the implementation of some project that will move us in the right direction after the trip. So,
no, Chairman, we will.
Okay, Member Dunn, I think you had a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Just to support the point that the Chairman made earlier, with regards to, the selection of pool of workers and ensuring that we have the right mix of workers that permits are going to be given to. And then you also said that you're working closer with JAMPRO. I'm hoping that closer means that there's an MOU, just like how you'd have other aspects of a project being signing off on, then there is something specific to labor that is a document itself that specifies, the categories of workers, that to ensure that we have that pool of workers in Jamaica that must be met before those permits are given. So that is a specific document that goes along with the project itself. So it's almost one of the project documents before you hear ground is going to be broken for X project somewhere. That document must be a part of that pool of documents that must be signed off on.
No, member, we don't have. We do have MOUs with JAMPRO, but we don't have that level of detail. But I will take the suggestion. What we do discuss with JAMPRO are the projects that are in the pipeline, the nature of the projects that are coming up, and what will be the requirements of those projects. But I take the suggestion that we can take it a step further and probably get a little bit more specific in terms of MOU with them on each project.
All right, Member Campbell.
Thanks, Chairman. P.S. You speak to these labor market surveys. How often do you do them?
We did one last year, and we're tabling another one this year. So over the last 3 years, we've been doing one every year.
Right.
Over the last 3 years, we've done one each year.
All right. Could you say what that survey says in relation to our demand for nurses is like?
Remember, you're asking me to get into the survey. I will have to.
Let me make it a little.
Because I don't have the information in my head.
You don't have the information.
In my head.
But broadly, are we able to satisfy the demand for nurses in Jamaica? Or training institutions?
No, we're not. We're not. We know that as a country, we're not. As we remember, as soon as we train our nurses, it's a cycle. And this is part of the challenge we have in terms of certain professions. As soon as we train as a country, there are other markets that are taking some of our nurses. Many of them move to, the markets that they move to. And so it's a constant cycle. Especially, I think, in the specialist nurses, the critical care ones and the emergency room nurses. There's a gap in the labor market there.
Right, but is there anything that you can do? Because it costs you to train them.
Well, I don't train them, member.
Well,
I provide the information on what is happening in the labor market.
The state pays to train them. And so there's no collaboration between yourself and the training institutions or the agencies of state which pay to train them.
No, you can't say that. You can't say that, member.
We don't. The state doesn't pay to train them.
I would. That's a question better answered by the Ministry of Education. What I do know is that we do train nurses island-wide, right? And what I do know is based on the labor market, where the skill gap is, primarily as it relates to those critical care nurses. So like your nurses in your operating theater nurses, the nurses that work in your neonatal units, your emergency room nurses, those are the specialist areas that we have a skill gap in Jamaica.
And similarly, with the specialist teachers, you have that. Is there a gap?
Sorry?
Is there a gap in relation to the specialist teachers?
Science, maths and science. What they call it? STEM.
Right. What about cybersecurity? Because I hear we're going ahead and we're linking and we're doing we're setting up all kinds of sophisticated networks, and are we training sufficient cybersecurity specialists to deal
I don't
with
have the information on cybersecurity, but in terms of the technology profession, what our survey have shown us is that there are increasing as more and more the country becomes more technologically, I was going to say dependent, but move towards the use of more technology. There is greater demand for IT professionals. But in terms of drilling down to the specific, in terms of cybersecurity, I couldn't say the specific in terms of cybersecurity.
Because where I'm getting to is the point where you would be guiding the training institutions as to what with areas of training that they ought to be heading into. And if you say that at this point, because we're becoming seriously dependent on the IT infrastructure, but at the same time we're vulnerable, and I think it's time we start paying attention to that area, because we certainly I managed to sometime in March I was part of a program to look at where that is going, and I'm frightened at how vulnerable we are. And I don't really want to go into some of the areas, because there are people out there who are listening and who want to find where our weaknesses are. But I think we have to anticipate and meet those areas of challenge that we have. Thank you.
Member Campbell, I just want to endorse. I think what you were sort of getting at in a general sense is that certainly in all of our constituencies we have a lot of young people that are trying to find what is the next step for me. Everybody wants employment. Many of them are in high school. And the extent to which we guide the market in training in areas and go out to these schools and indicate to them areas of great opportunity can sort of guide the process. That's part of this whole modernization of our of the Ministry of Labor that I was talking about, getting it to focus more on sort of challenging, not the forward side of it, of finding some jobs, but how do we get persons in the right direction? And I think you made the point, you spoke about nurses. You know, I hear of the perennial shortage of nurses from the days way back when I used to practice, and especially at the different levels. And I think that where a Ministry of Labor sees this, and we can put in place policies that maybe more training institutions, more spaces, because this is an area of great opportunity. There must be some internal dialogue that drives this. And I think that you have to find a way to play a pivotal role in it, because you're the one that's doing the market research, and we have to guide that in the right direction. And then even if you find within nursing that there are specific fields that are in more demand, how do you challenge that to get more training in those areas? And not just there, but in going back, as we said, what do we need for BPOs? Where are they going to go? You know, I would like, for example, for BPOs to be put up in Westmoreland. Many of us would want it, but then you're going to have to look at training the persons in the area to take up these jobs. How do we do it? And I think that the coordination of this, I think the Ministry of Labor has to probably put together and have a department, you may have already, that focuses on this and has the ability to reach back into the other ministries that are affected by it. So I think, Member Campbell, that's where you are going with the line of questioning, because I said to you, I would never be able to tell somebody in Lickland and Higher Grangeville High, well, maybe you need to go in and start studying cybersecurity. Or, you know, these may be, the other day, I don't remember which minister was here was talking about some training programs. I think it was an electrician or something like that, but that they had trained 15 people and all 15 went to Trinidad to work. You know, yeah, which program was that? It happens. Yeah, and so if that's the case, if these opportunities are there, feed them back, because trust me, I can go to my institutions, because a lot of the young people, their greatest fear is going through school, studying, and not finding a job. So therefore, your job, well, your mission has to be to say, these are areas of high opportunity. So let's focus on that as well. So I think that's what we're getting at. Yeah. Member Campbell, I'm sorry, Member Clark, and then I'll read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Permanent Secretary. Ever since I've done economics in high school, you are taught one of the first rules is that the greater the demand, the greater the supply. Some time ago, we would have learned that remittance, overseas remittance, coming to Jamaica was second on our income earner for the country at one point. I know we pay great attention to farm workers going abroad. We send away thousands of them per year. How far-fetched is it that, looking at the glass half full, to say that there's a need for our specialists, nurses and teachers, that we as a country would now look at the whole idea of training a lot more for that market, that niche market that is out there, and hope that we will be able to get back even a greater amount of remittance to this country that is so needed. Also, we could look at a situation, because we understand that not every youngster is able to finance themselves through tertiary institution, and therefore we will know the number, the cadre of personnel, these specified persons that we would want, and then we can offer to them scholarship and bond them to the country for the first 5 or so years, depending on the finance that we had given to them, and therefore would answer the question. I I really find it disencouraging, Mr. Chairman, when I hear that there is a gap or we're losing our specialists to other countries. We are not. Because I'm not hearing anybody saying that we are losing our farm workers to other countries. We are very proud of that. Why can't it be that we look at it in the same breath, that we are very proud of the situation that we have had 2,000 or 3,000 nurses going off to other countries, other shores, to create work for themselves and to send back that remittance that the country does need?
Well, member, I think you have spoken to what is a possible solution and a spin-off benefit, in that we as a country, we have to recognize that we're losing some of our specialists. And so if we need to be able to retain, we have to overtrain. Right? When I say overtrain, meaning train more than what the domestic market needs, with the expectation that we will be able to fulfill the local market, and then, you know, the attrition in terms of persons leaving, and of course there's a spin-off benefits from remittances. So I think that is you know, a cue that I believe the training institutions need to take up. You mentioned about scholarships and bonds, and I do know that in fact occurs, but what invariably happens in some instances, not in all instances, people will serve the bond for a year or 2 years, and after a year or 2 years, when the individual actually gets the experience, the amount remaining on the bond is not as great as year one, and it's paid off because, you know, it's an opportunity cost, and it's paid off, and then the individual leaves. So I think that, you know, it is something that is being done in terms of bonding people and thing, but it is not going to be the only solution. So we have to certainly in some areas train more than what the local market needs.
And therefore, Mr. Chairman, just as how the Prime Minister has implemented the cadet corps, wherein you will be trained for a year, and the police, the JCF or the army can draw from that cadre of persons, and the rest can go. I think that we understand what it takes for nurses to be enrolled in an institution. But what if, because there are a lot more youngsters who would want to become nurse, but their attrition from high school is not really up to stand? What if we, through the ministries, can implement a core just the same, give them the basic training, so you start to categorize it different levels. And as they make the attrition level, Mr. Chairman, it makes it easier. And sometimes they are more committed going through the ranks. They are more committed than somebody who just moves straight from high school into the training institution.
I think, P.S., I think what is coming out of this discussion is simply this. We have a tendency to do labor market surveys, and then you table it, and then we do one next year. I think what we're saying is that we want to see a greater level of analysis of these surveys, looking at the opportunities that exist, and then determining how we are able to feed back to education, to the different areas, to even the tertiary institutions, information getting back to the schools that guide students in maybe what areas would be best for them to go in. And sort of having this discussion as members Campbell-Dunn and Clark have had. Because at the end of the day, we need to move from the theory to the practice. We want some practicality. We want to say, these are opportunities, how can we deal with it? And look, if we put something in place and it's wrong, we can change it and go another way. But we need to start moving from where we are at. And as was said before, a lot of these things are sometimes looked at as a negative, oh, nurses leaving. It's an opportunity. Where persons are able to get an opportunity, it is good. So we just need to create more of those opportunities. And we're saying your role as a Ministry of Labor is not just to monitor and study a labor force, but how are you going to influence it and change it to make it better?
Chairman, if I may, through the Permanent Secretary, the Ministry has started the contemplation in that regard, and I know that it is something that we are intending to do certainly over the next financial year, not only doing the survey, but actually looking at the proposals, looking at what the market is saying to us, and to have those policy proposals presented as to the areas for future training. And it's not, we are looking at, while our trends now look at existing changes in the market, so where the hot jobs or where the opportunities which exist and may be emerging immediately, we're also looking at what we call a futuristic approach in terms of looking at the future needs, the future training needs, what's the future work or opportunities, and we'll be making that analysis and looking at the proposals and making these proposals to the government, linking more with the training institutions in terms of heart. One of the things that emerged from the labor market report that was tabled in the Parliament is for the Ministry to take a more proactive role in identifying the areas for training and making recommendations for training to other ministries and departments. And this is something that we do take seriously, and work has begun in ensuring that we can do that within the next year or two.
Well, that's what I think you have answered some of the questions, but what we would like from you is for you to certainly, if you could feed some of this information back to us as a committee. You know, information is always a good thing. So in a couple of months, maybe 3 months' time, if you can give us an idea, you'd have done an analysis of your labor market surveys and tell us how you are moving to sort of implement. Because if you within your report to us are able to say these are areas, I mean, this is who we're talking to, we might well be able to follow up with you. All of us here as member of parliaments have an interest in finding jobs for our constituents. So, but you know, we would work with you on that. So probably in 3 months' time, Ms. Bailey, if we can just remind you, just give us something to tell us how you're moving with this specific area. As I said, we want to move from talking about what we are supposed to be doing to actually seeing it done. And when you do it, if you're not getting a response, then we can follow up. We can follow the trail to ensure that this is done. Member Don?
Chairman, before I go on again, I'd just like to welcome the students from St. Mary Tech, the best school in Jamaica.
And I know you speak without a bias bone in your body.
But a very big bias.
Absolutely.
I'd like to pick up on a point that was made earlier by Member Campbell, PS, and that again is cybersecurity. I mean, we see in the news where companies, countries have concerns about some companies, technology companies, and their software. And we see in Jamaica where we have to, of course, import some of the skill sets to deal with some of these new and emerging, quite sophisticated softwares and hardwares. Does the ministry have any particular unit or the skill sets that vets these employment requests that these companies are making for those assets to be placed in Jamaica? Are you influencing the discussion with any training institution in the development of some of these skill sets that we will need in Jamaica, because Jamaicans will have a greater interest in protecting their borders and whatever happens here rather than outside persons who are employed in Jamaica. So when these requests are made from these companies that wants to set up business in Jamaica, is there a specific unit or the skill set that exists within the ministry that vets these applications?
Yes, member, and specifically as it relates to new companies that are coming, or companies, technology companies, as you are referring to, many times what we find is that those work permit requests are for short periods of time. It's not a request that's going to be for somebody for 2 years, 3 years, year in, year out. So yes, you may have, because a lot of these software and things are not developed locally. So there are instances where the skill set has to be brought in to be able to train our local people, right? And then that skill set then goes back and our local people would be trained. So we do look at applications. There are instances where when an application is granted, we will say there is a conditionality attached to that approval where the company needs to train somebody to replace this particular individual. And that's the way where we try to ensure that there's a transfer of knowledge and training locally.
Just to say, remember that we will be, there's a section here for us to deal with work permits at the bottom. So I want us to just more specifically. I want to kind of move to the National Insurance Fund. If you have something just on labor market reform.
That's what I wanted to start my comments on.
On what?
Based on the National Insurance Fund.
No. All right. I'll take you first, but let me just take the formalities. Let us move now, members, to the National Insurance Fund. And what, PS, what would be good is if you could just give us a short brief on it, and then we will open it up to any discussion.
Okay. All right. Okay, Chairman. So the National Insurance Fund, the report is there, but let me highlight a few things that I believe would be important for the committee. So we know the National Insurance Fund is there as the investment arm for the National Insurance Scheme, where contributions that are collected, any excesses invested for the long-term benefit of the pensioners. Over the years, Chairman, and committee members, the National Insurance Fund has been doing fairly well, and the preliminary figures for the 18-19 period, the fund grew by approximately 13.67% as of March year over. That is, the fund stood at approximately $120.7 billion. The growth in the fund is primarily driven by the equity portfolio that has been doing well. It's no secret. The Jamaican stock market worldwide has been doing exceptionally well. So a lot of the growth has been because of our performance in terms of the stock market.
All right. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's the, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the PS, Mrs. Rezen. Your document here states that there has been an increase in the pension benefits and there's a decrease in, there was no increase in the contribution. How do you speak to the sustainability of this program?
I think we're dealing with the fund first. Remember, I think we were going to, huh? Mm-hmm. We're going to deal with the pension scheme.
No, it's okay. They're married, you know. Chairman,
I know,
so.
but yeah, all right. Yeah, but you had not
they're
really.
They're intertwined.
I know they're married. I was taking them as separate. But if you want to, are there any comments you want to make on the scheme then in terms of its
No, it's okay. You can.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I was saying that there seemed to be, based on the document here, an increase in the pension benefits, but no increase in contribution. How do we see the fund in the next 5-10 years as it relates to its sustainability?
Okay, member. There was an increase in the contribution rate as of April 1st, this year. So contributions previously were 5%, 2.5% and 2.5%. It went up by 0.5 percentage. So it's 2.75% employer, 2.75% employee. So it has increased. The last year, an increase in the benefits was granted, starting, I think that increase started in August. We started paying the increase in August, but it was retroactive to April of last year. So in terms of the sustainability of the fund, though, that is one of the reasons why the contribution rate was increased by 0.5%. And it is actually scheduled to be increased further. I must point out, though, member, that we do an actuarial review every 3 years. One will be done looking at the scheme and the fund as of 2019. The last one that was done and tabled in the Parliament, it was done in 2017, looking at the performance, the state of the scheme and the fund up to 2016. That report was tabled in 2017, and it was based on the findings of that report that the ministry was able to grant an increase in the benefits. Members may recall that for 2 years, no increase in the NIS benefits was granted, and it's because of the sustainability issue. We have to ensure that we are responsible stewards of the fund and the scheme, and we could not grant the increase until we had a corresponding increase in the contributions.
The challenge that we face or we hear each day from our pensioners is that they are barely able to eke out a living, having worked and contributed to national development. Is there not a policy or something being looked at as it relates to, say, the inflation, to look at it, to peg it a little bit nearer to the rates? Because many of our pensioners are dying. They can hardly pay their bills, their medication and all of those things there. Is that not taken into consideration?
Well, member, I'm going to share a simple math with you, and that is, you have to remember that it is what you contribute that is invested, that when you retire, you are able to reap a benefit. Now, as it stands now, based on the increased contribution rates that was granted in April of this year, each month, I'm sure when you look on your pay slip, it's a little over $3,000 per month that you contribute towards a national insurance scheme. But a contributor who would have contributed 30, 40 years ago would have contributed significantly less. But now that contributor gets a minimum, if they've worked, and satisfied all the requirements, they're eligible to get $3,400 per week. So it is actually, the figure may seem small, but when you look at what was actually contributed vis-a-vis what we are paying, I wish there were many other investments like this, because I would be putting more money there, certainly for my pension. So it is a balancing. To come back to your point, we would love to be able to satisfy everybody's need, but I think we would not be responsible persons. And I would love to ensure that when you reach retirement age 65, and I reach 65, that there is a fund that is there to provide me with a benefit. So if we pay everything now and we deplete the fund, so we have to look at our liabilities over time.
So, Chair.
I'm being reminded that within 2 years, based on today's rate, what somebody gets now, what they would have contributed in their lifetime, they get it back within 2 years, dollar for dollar. And people are living longer. Average life expectancy now is 78, 79. We're doing very well as a country, but there are other implications. It means that at 65, we're paying out that benefit conservatively for 14, 15 years, and we see people living way up until their 80s, and we have a lot of 90s and 100-year-olds. So, we're paying out the benefit for a much longer period. So it is, that we work very closely with the actuaries to ensure that what we're doing, we are being responsible. We're managing properly, right? It's not perfect. It's not ideal.
Member Whittle?
Yeah, I think partially answer the question, because I was just going to ask, how does the increase in life expectancy impact your fund in terms of the contribution?
Yes. Well, the actuaries take that into consideration when they're doing their analysis and their projections. And we are guided by them in terms of the increase that they recommend. So when we granted that increase last year, it was guided by the actuarial report and the review.
Hold on 1 second. Member Dunn? 1 second.
P.S. I'm happy that the fund stands currently at 120.7 billion, and that the government saw it fit to have the 0.5 adjustment to ensure the sustainability. You also mentioned that the majority of it is in equity portfolio. Could you just say what is the breakout of this particular amount that you have? And I'm sure that you're managing the risk as best as you can, but just for the public to know, how is this 120 billion is accounted for?
All right. All right, so remember, if you turn to page 16 of the report, the highest return was in the equity portfolio, right? But that was not the largest percentage of the portfolio. So out of the $120.7 billion, fixed income represented 72 billion, sorry. That's approximately 60% of the fund is in fixed income, 26.5% is invested in equities, and we have 12.6% in real estate, 2.1% in mortgages and loans, and that's the distribution spread. But in terms of performance of the portfolio, equities is performing the best in the portfolio.
All right. Yes.
Chairman, could I just
sorry, member.
P.S. In terms of the distribution, who makes the determination as to where you place the greater percentage of your investment?
There is an advisory board for the National Insurance Fund, and there is the investment policy. No, the board and the members of staff at the National Insurance Fund would, of course, come up with a recommendation that goes to the board, that goes to the Ministry of Finance. And I'm not a financial expert member, but it is through that process that a portfolio mix is arrived at.
And in terms of the staffing and the body that makes that final determination, how is it weighted? Is the greater weight placed on the staff at the ministry or is it with the advisory?
No, it's not a matter of the staff. It's a matter of the process. There's an analysis that would be looked at. How does one portfolio perform against the other? What is our appetite for risk? Because risk is very important. You notice 60% of the portfolio is in fixed income. So that's fairly safe investment. So if we have a higher appetite for risk, then we will move more to equities. I mean, fixed income and real estate are fairly safe, and those two areas is what, 72% approximately. So it's all, it's a matter of how much exposure do we want in terms of the risk, and so there is that analysis that is done. But ultimately, whatever the recommendation that is arrived at between, the staff doing the analysis, the board looking at it, it ultimately gets presented to the Ministry of Finance, who will. Yes.
In effect, is a rubber stamping activity.
I can't say that the Ministry of Finance rubber stamps member.
Well, the Ministry of Finance is not going to override an analysis which has been done by you. You have this advisory board, and you have the staff members who guide and they do all. So what I really want to find out, because even within that band where you have 60% in fixed, you have persons who are deciding where those investments are placed. And I want to find out who decides at that level before it goes to.
Okay. Remember, I'm gonna call on Miss Fisher, who works with the National Insurance Fund, but I want to ensure that you're clear. The National Insurance Fund Board, it's an advisory board, but one of their main mandate is to oversee and guide investments. So it is not an individual that is ultimately making a decision, right? There is a process, but I will ask Ms. Fisher to expound a little bit more on the process.
Yes, I understand all of it, and I take it like similarly, as the Bank of Jamaica is moving along a particular line to get experts to head their MPC. Because a significant body of funds, and really I make my comments against the background that I recall that was 2 years ago or thereabout. We had reports of some activities which are taking place which were inconsistent with the policies which are outlined by the advisory board and the Ministry of Finance. Do we have your assurance that those things which were happening then have been corrected and there is absolutely no risk to the funds by virtue of those activities which are taking place then?
Remember, you have my assurance, right? We have reviewed a lot of our internal processes and procedures, and our procedures have been vastly strengthened since that time. But I will ask if you want more clarification. I'm not sure if do you need more clarification?
Yes, I think it's important. What Member Campbell has said, it's something that would be important for us. As you said, 2 years ago, there was the issue reported of $600 million that was invested by the fund, and the fraud squad was coming, etc., etc. But we have not really heard anything about it. So it would be very useful for us if you could tell us what has happened with that investigation. What is the situation now? Were the funds recovered, or what happened with it? Or if not recovered may not be the right word, but what eventually happened? And lastly, what was put in place to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Chairman, that particular matter is still under investigation. It's been investigated.
That's like 2 years ago, eh? Or last year?
Yes, it was
2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Still under investigation?
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
I wonder if any investigations ever come to fruition.
You're saying this is two, and the investigation is being conducted by.
I think the fraud squad was called in.
No, but it's a year and a half. Last year, January was when the matter was reported to them.
All right.
And
It
this
was
is,
last year, January.
and this involves the department from the Ministry of Finance, FID.
Yes.
And so after we're running close to 18 months now, and is it that they're not getting the cooperation of the ministry? Why it is that investigation is not yet
No,
complete?
member. I am going to categorically state that that particular matter was referred by me to them, and the ministry has been cooperating fully
Was the
with them.
fraud squad called in?
Not the fraud squad, but it's the FID.
Why?
Because it's a financial crime, financial investigation division. It falls within their
So it's being
speciality.
investigated by the ministry?
No,
Or by-
by the financial investigation
Of the-
division.
of the- right, of the JCF.
They are the ones that deals with these sorts of.
All right.
So if that particular matter, we have not heard the outcome of that. Well, we know it's not concluded, but I have not.
But a year and a half later, no charges, nothing, just under investigation.
That's as much as I can say, Chairman. I don't have a further update from them.
Member Dunn, it's on this issue?
No, Chairman, I'm just saying we definitely need an update on that matter because things cannot be left lingering. The public needs to know what has happened. And after almost 18 months to 2 years, we're still in the dark.
Right. It was reported to them last year, January, towards the end of January. I want to assure the committee, though, it was not a matter that funds were expended and those funds were lost. As a matter of fact, what it was a procedural breach in approval, right? So that we have sort of strengthened and corrected. Interestingly, it relates to the equity portfolio, and the particular stock that was purchased is actually doing very well in the portfolio.
Have you been able, what have you done to strengthen that? To ensure it doesn't happen again?
It's the procedures have been revised,
So
right?
It goes
and
back,
the accountability
yes, one second.
and the authority of sign off on what gets done and how it is done.
Yes, you're going right back to what Member Campbell was eloquently stating before. This is a large fund. Who determines what goes where? Who is managing the fund? And you're saying it's the advisory board? No, but there must be a clear answer to the question.
The advisory board chairman advises, and they, up to a certain threshold of the fund, approves investments.
So who manages the fund? I'm not clear.
Are you
Maybe
talking about?
I'm talking about the.
Are you talking about the day-to-day management of the fund? We have staff
No,
that is in place.
I'm making the point that here you have a situation where you have clearly said that certain funds were used to buy stocks, and then you found out that there was a procedural difficulty. It would mean that there is some degree of sort of autonomy amongst persons to just buy a stock,
Well, that has
rather than one thinking that there is some sage body of financial experts that are saying this and this and this. So you now say that you have rectified it. I'm not certain what has been done, what you mean by rectified.
Well,
and secondly,
Chairman and members, all purchases no and all investments no, with the exception of your rollover investments, right? But all new investments, right, now go to the board for approval.
There was a.
Sorry, Chairman. Which board, PS?
The NIF advisory board that I mentioned earlier.
But who supervises that board? Who vets the decision of that board?
What you're saying is true.
Mike.
Board, an advisory board. It doesn't approve anything.
It doesn't what?
If it is an advisory board, it has no power to approve anything.
It is a unique board member in that the board has been given certain.
So it's not an advisory board.
It's an advisory board primarily because the NIF is not a body corporate. So it doesn't have, it's not its own entity where it can have a board of management. So it is a board that was established some 20 plus years ago, I believe it was, first established. At that time, back in the mid-1990s, we weren't aggressively investing excess contributions that were collected. And at that time, a decision was taken, we need to begin to, because of course you have future liability and any excess you have needs to be invested, right? And at that time, advisory board was first established to oversee investments. So what has happened over time, a investment policy has been developed. That investment policy is approved by the Ministry of Finance, right? The policy gives the board the authority to approve investments up to 0.5% of the value of the fund. Any investment that is over that amount has to go to the Ministry of Finance, and then there's another threshold where beyond that amount it has to go to Cabinet. So there are varying thresholds in terms of approval. And every approval, already the fund sometimes is not as agile when there is a investment opportunity out there because of the process. And, so we do work within the process and to ensure.
P.S. I understand. It's a nice dance, but let me just take you a little further. Where you had this procedural breach, as you describe it, is it one of those situations where you, in your discretion as the principal officer, had to make a decision as to whether the officer or officers involved were charged with misconduct in a public office?
Sorry, say that again.
Did it fall in your lap to decide whether those officers who committed this procedural breach were charged with the offense of misconduct in a public office?
Remember, there is due process, and so what you
I understand that.
What you found
I understand
happening,
that, and after you having gone through your due process, and did you make the determination that there was no wrongdoing?
No, I didn't make a determination that there was no wrongdoing. I made a determination that there was a procedural breach.
You made okay. And
there was a procedural breach, but there is something that is called customs and practice. And so customs and practice is what was obtaining at the time, right? Which was different from what should have been done based on the documented procedure. So what I did was to reinforce and to put the mechanisms in place, right? So within the policy, if I must speak specific, the policy says investments must go to the advisory board for approval, right? And I'm ad-libbing here, not speaking exactly what is in the policy. However, over the years, not a new practice, over the years, what had been happening was that the fund and the staff were given certain latitude, and so they would report at the monthly board meetings purchases and what was done. But the policy said all investments must be approved up to that limit, and it speaks to the thresholds and what is the board, what is Ministry of Finance, what is, right? So when you have customs and practice for years and it was not seen as a problem, and there you had a matter happening, I at that point could not then tell someone that what you had been doing for years, that you had been allowed to do for years, that you are now wrong. I can warn and say, and you've done labor law?
a little bit.
A little bit of labor law. There's such a thing as natural justice, customs and practice.
Yes.
If you do something year in, year out, you're never told that it is wrong, I can't then come and tell you that it is wrong, and on that basis I'm going to discipline you. I now need to say it is wrong, don't do it again, and after that, if you breach, I can then take whatever steps. So,
but here's where I can't reconcile all of this. You say it was a custom and a practice, and people. But then you took the decision to have the matter referred to the FID.
Because some additional information came out, which Chairman and members, you know, while I want to give the committee information, I am also quite aware that it is still a matter that is under investigation.
Very well, PS. I understand all of that. So we are now left where we started. That this matter, after 18 months or thereabouts, with all the expertise which lies in the palm of the people at the FID, they can't make a determination as to whether there was wrongdoing or otherwise. So that the personnel which still reside, because I have not heard of any member of staff who has parted company with the ministry. They still reside there. We can't make a determination as to whether there was wrongdoing, and life goes on beautiful in the state of Denmark.
We have had persons who have parted company with, but I won't continue because I don't want to.
Member Campbell, I must say that I have some concerns. What you're saying is really resonating with me, and I'll tell you why. There are a number of things that we have seen over the last few years, and we have had discussions on them, and they have gone for investigation, and then at the end of a period of time, you're not really hearing anything back. I'll give you another example that just comes to mind quickly. Nearly a year and a half, 2 years ago, we all had a discussion about the used motor car vehicles, police, that was before us. A year ago, we met and we were supposed to be following up. And we went into recess and had a discussion amongst ourselves and decided not to discuss it, simply because it was under investigation. And we said, well, let's put it off for 3 more months. We are now a year later. It seems like no investigation reaches completion. So the real feeling that you get is that there's no accountability anyway. And I'm wondering, members, if at some point we are going to have to call in those who are charged with investigations and ask them whether or not, whether it is MOCA, whether it is the Integrity Commission, etc., what is happening, why it is that all of these things, and what is the time frame of these investigations? Because quite frankly, justice delayed, justice denied. So it's something I think we are going to, having concluded these discussions, I think members, I'm inclined for us to start calling in some of these persons charged with investigations and asking whether or not they feel they are able to do what they can do, whether there are resource constraints, what it is that years later we just can't seem to find anything coming to fruition. Member Don?
Just out of interest, Mr. Chair, PS, how many persons are on this advisory board?
$17.
17.
17.
That's a board, that's a multitude. A question, how many of them are financial experts?
Give me a second.
That's troubling.
About 5 or 6. I don't have the names in my head. Chairman, it's about 5 or 6 are
Let me go through. In the wake of the issue that Member Cameron raised, in the wake of that, the stocks, and I mean, quite frankly, let us just say that $600 million worth of stock, you have to be really powerful to place that amount of stock. That's a lot of money. The question, immediately after that, a release had come out from the ministry that you were merging. I understand it, just looking at the reports. You had said the fund and the NIS in some way. I don't know, I'd like some clarity on that. What you were saying, but you also pointed out that you may be moving to privatize the fund. Now, were those reports factual?
Chairman, I don't know about privatization at this point in time. What I can tell the committee is that we are in fact looking, and persons may recall that the Minister of Finance in December or early January, I think it was, announced the establishment of a NIF review commission. Now, that commission is made up of all financial experts, primarily financial experts, along with some legal persons. And it's out of the Ministry of Finance that we are working with and supporting. And what they are doing is looking at the investment side of things, what is done, how it gets done, what should be the portfolio mix. So looking at those sorts of things and putting forward a recommendation to the Minister of Finance. The interesting thing, Chairman, is that the fund has 2 ministers. It has the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Labor and Social Security.
Absolutely.
So there is that connection there. But we are not privatizing. What has been said.
So that is, no, that's a
As
That's
it
a very
is
important
now,
point.
as it is now, Chairman and members, at this point in time, I don't know what will come out of the NIF Review Commission, which is made up of these financial experts. I don't know if one of their recommendations may be privatization, but it is not something that is being actively pursued now at this point in time. It may come out from their work. Now, what we know, Chairman, is that the NIF needs to become its own body corporate. It needs to have its own body corporate status, right? You raised about it's an advisory board, and an advisory board really doesn't have power. So it is a very unique creature in government. I don't think we have any other institution like this in government where an advisory board is given this kind of latitude as it relates to investments. So there is a conundrum, right? So right now, I am responsible for the staffing of the National Insurance Fund, but when it comes on to the actions in terms of investments and decisions, it is the advisory board. That's not an ideal situation. And so we are moving towards establishing it as a body corporate. One of the difficult decisions that we have to make is, will the body corporate be for the fund, or will the body corporate be for the fund and the scheme? Because remember I said they are married.
Just before you go, Madam, just for those of us that, when you say for the fund and the scheme, my understanding was that the National Insurance Scheme, money was collected and turned over to the fund. When you say for the fund and the scheme, you're implying that both have funds to be invested separately.
No, I'm not implying that. But the fund can't exist without the scheme. And the scheme, as it stands now, can't exist without the fund.
Obviously,
so they're umbilically connected.
Yes, the fund is really, it is interchangeable. It's just the amount of funds on the investment.
Right.
Exactly. So,
but the fund is responsible for financing the payment of benefits. So there is the intertwining. So
because
that's why
they have to tell you what they're going to get, so that the funds can be released for that when necessary.
Right. And if the scheme is,
well, let me just say, what is becoming patently clear to me out of this is that this is a pension scheme. I was very involved with the tourism pension scheme, which was recently tabled. I went through a lot of discussion with them, with industry persons about it. And one of the things that became patently clear to me is that with a scheme of this size, you want to have trust, and there must be a mechanism almost hands-off with regard to how the pension, the fund itself is managed. And what I am picking up here, just from the discussions, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but it seems a lot looser than I would have liked. You have a board which oversees it, which is an advisory board, rather than sort of a trust as you may have in other pension schemes. You're dealing with possibly the largest fund. I don't know that there's any other fund in Jamaica that has $120 billion under trust. And just in terms of its makeup, there should be some persons on it who are appointed by virtue of their capacity, far more, their expertise, far more than just being selected by the appropriate minister, etc. So my feeling is, just having this discussion, that there has to be some real fundamental changes in how this fund is both overseen and managed. Is that,
Sure.
am I wrong?
No, you are right, Chairman, and I believe that was one of the motivating reasons why the Minister of Finance established that NIF Review Commission.
Member Dunn, yeah?
Chairman, I sit here and I'm a little bit very uneasy. The NIF has been around for a very, very long time. And for a board of 17 members, and as via a board of 17 persons, and just 30% of that board has persons with the capacity to manage $120.7 billion. I'm very, very uneasy. This board needs immediate reconstituting. That over 60% at least of the persons on that board have that capacity to make financial decisions. 60%.
Well, member, the board, the board requires more than just persons with financial capacity. We have persons who are there who are lawyers, because you need people with legal expertise. So the board doesn't just have financial experts. They're persons with legal knowledge. They're representatives there from the trade union. They're representatives from the employers federation. So maybe 5 or 6 persons may be specific financial experts, but if you had a board with all 17 financial experts, I'm not sure that would be the best either. You need to ensure that you have a good mix.
I completely agree with that. With factors dealing with money, right? While I agree you need the makeup of the members that you just indicated, but this is such an important aspect, because if there are few persons on there who can basically drive the decision, weighted for where this is invested, and maybe because they have personal interests in that investment, then maybe that can lead to these so-called procedural errors eventually. So I believe that, as I said before, at least 60% of that advisory board should be made up of persons who have intimate knowledge about investment decisions.
All right. Yes. At the time, you had said you were merging the two. Last year, you had indicated that you were hiring a consultant to lead the merging of the NIF and the NIS?
Not to lead the merger, but we were in the process of reviewing the scheme. And part of the recommendations from that consultant was that they also look at the fund. Yes. And that process began. We didn't get far into that particular consultancy as it relates to the fund aspect of things. That consultancy is still going on with respect to the scheme, but the Minister of Finance appointed the specialist group to delve into the fund, and so we sort of deferred to their work.
So the question though, you had, at that point, you had hired a consultant to sort of look at the rationalizing?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No. So at that time, Chairman and members, we know the scheme is 53 years old. And what we had done, a lot of our business processes and the structure was not the best for what we need now. And so someone was had to sort of do a diagnostic look at the scheme, the operation, its structure, and to work with us to see how we can have efficiency improvements and what is the best structure. Along the way, last year, the whole conundrum that I spoke about with the fund came up these consultants were already on board, and we were looking to engage them further, since they had already started with the scheme, to look at the fund. Shortly after that, we had not yet amended their TOR, but shortly after that, the Minister of Finance announced the appointment of this NIF Review Commission, and so we sort of deferred on our work to allow the Ministry of Finance, who, if the NIF is going to become a public body, would have to drive that process along with us.
So what do the consultants do now?
The consultants are focusing on the scheme, which was what they were originally contracted to do.
Okay. All right. So, okay. Two other questions. Number one, within the NIS itself, if I'm paying NIS every month. And at age 50, I suddenly pass away, what happens to what would have been my pension at the time, and can it be used for death benefit or for some other use? What happens at that point in time?
Okay, Chairman, I must admit I'm a little tired. I'm going to ask my expert from National Insurance Scheme, Mr. Fagan, to help the committee with that response.
Good afternoon, Chair, members. As it relates to your question, at age 50, if the contributor dies and say they are eligible, meet the qualifying conditions, they'll be entitled to
When you say eligible, what do you mean?
For you to get a benefit from NIS, there are certain qualifications.
Yeah, like you have worked for like 15 years and you have to be paying it and so forth.
So as long as you meet that qualifying condition, you will be entitled to a funeral grant. Or the person.
How much is that?
Funeral grant as it stands now is $90,000. You'll also, your family members, or if you have a spouse, the surviving spouse will be entitled to what we call a widow's benefit, which would actually be the pension that the deceased would have received. So it will now be passed over to the widow.
She gets it on death or on when he would have been the age, or is there something?
No, on death, he will qualify. The widow will qualify for it. And
do you have in your numbers the persons, say the number of persons who are paying their NIS, pass away, and no one claims their pensions or no one claims a death benefit? I say this because, quite frankly, I suspect a lot of people don't know that this exists. We as Member of Parliament, you have a lot of people, they pass away, and they will come and ask for some assistance. We're all there, and it may well be that a lot of these people have a benefit due to them, but if no one claims it, it just goes in. So it would be interesting to know if you keep some data on this, and whether or not there is a need to do more advertising, more public relations on these issues.
Okay, Chair, we have actually done information session. We have actually been over the year, and there's a small amount of persons probably that would not know, but I can guarantee that most persons do know and do access the benefits, do access the widow's benefit, the funeral grant, special child and orphans benefit. Those are the survivors benefit that is attached to an individual's contribution. So yes, there's need to do more information and more widespread publication, but yes, we do.
But what I must add to Chairman is that if someone comes in applying for the funeral grant, for example, and our officers realize that this person will be eligible, the spouse will be eligible for a benefit, our officers actually guide them in the process of applying for that widow's benefit.
Yeah, I say this because the NIS is compulsory. And what happens is that most of us, when we start to work, it's just one of those deductions they get used to. Look at it and cuss it and move on. But the fact of the matter is that it may be that in something like this, that is compulsory, that has going to everybody, that there, whether you do the newspaper thing or there should be some written something in writing to each member, because you're taking money every month, just for persons to ensure that these persons who are now part of a pension scheme, who are now part, they understand their benefits as they would in something more compulsory.
Chair, while I accept that there can be much more, or there can be more, in terms of letting persons be aware, we do try from time to time. We go into just about anyone calls upon us to do presentations. We do it to the employers, we do it in the communities, we do it in the church. But one of the issues that affects this, in terms of I've heard you speak about sending in reminders or letters, is that persons register for NIS because employers have mandated, or the law mandates that they do. But the issue is that persons actually do not come in and update their information. So you might find someone registered for NIS from 1970, and the only time we'll ever see them again is when they want the benefit. So as much as
which is difficult for them coming, especially if they die.
No, we're talking before they die. What, as you rightly said, Chair, this is one of the compulsory deduction, and I'm saying if you see something coming out of your salary and you don't want it to come out anyhow, but you see it come out, you need to check and see what is happening to you.
No, because you're speaking to me now. I don't know about my four colleagues that are here, but I don't know that I have updated. I don't know. I wouldn't know what to update or where. I only know that wherever I work, you find me. To take.
Well, then
it's out of it.
Well,
however, it must be fairly well updated as it is. But if there is some other procedure that we should know, it probably would be important for us to.
Currently, we are on the air, and we have actually asked the members of the public to do visit the NIS office to check up on their contributions. We also encourage all government entities, even you members of parliament, to actually ask the parliament to get that information first.
Is this online?
We're going there, Chairman.
The development stage.
We're going there.
All right.
We're going there. What we want, Chairman, is that every contributor to become their own compliance keeper, because it is also at the point where when persons come to apply for a benefit, they realize that the employer 20 years ago was deducting the money but was not paying it over to us. So late last year, we rolled out how many modules? 4 modules? 4 modules of a new IT system. The last module, or one of the last modules to be rolled out, which is a compliance module, which with that module, what we will be doing is taking the information online. So using certain security checks, and remember, we will ensure that we have cyber security taken care of. Using certain security checks, someone will be able to log on and see their contribution records and see where the gaps are. The possibility may exist or will exist for us to be able to use that, so individuals can update their information. Nowadays, people are using emails and so forth. So we are moving.
What's the time frame? Because I'm just saying to you, point was made. This scheme has been around for years. The fund has been around for years. One would expect that I would have thought we'd have been further ahead in that process. And the ministry itself and the NIS office, you want it to be very interconnected. And I make a point, Mr. Fagan, we were supposed to have a discussion because I found something interesting. Someone a company that I am part of is trying to get its TCC updated. So I'm told that they have to visit every agency, NHT, NIS, everything, to get this compliance certificate. And my first question would be that you'd expect government to be somewhat interrelated, that these things would be in place. And then to my amazement, they indicated that the accountant was saying that to be able to check the NIS, he's in Kingston, would have to travel to Westmoreland to check it at the office there, and that can make no sense at all in today.
Chairman, I agree with you. That would make no sense because that is not the case. I guess the accountant was misinformed or he misunderstood what was said.
I'm happy to hear that.
Right. So the process would be, as the company exists in Westmoreland and the accountant is Kingston, so they visit the office in Kingston to get that clearance. What will happen is that the officer in Kingston will liaise with the one in Westmoreland to see if there's any other outstanding issues.
What are they supposed to do, though? You see, here's the point I'm making. Sometimes we're doing these things, but we make it so complex that you just can't get no business done. And we want everything to be easy, but we want to get the thing done. No, I'm just saying, at NIS, if a company has employees, they're either paying or not paying. You're supposed to have that on your system. If you have it on your system, boom, sign off and move on. That would be my thought. What really happens?
Okay, that is where actually the statutory body, NIS, NHT, TAG, and RT is going. But as you so speak, the issue is now that there may be existing issues before it is rolled into one system that needs to be ascertained. And
issues such as what?
If the company was owing, because tax office collects on our behalf. So while the amalgamation process is on in earnest, there might be some gaps as to if this company owes NIS, if it owes NHT. So when we ascertain that, then the process can also be done from tax office, because if the person visits tax office and say they want to do they want to get a TCC, then tax office will do all of the work, the groundwork for them. So it doesn't.
Tax office is sending them to NIS. But you know that.
Well, put it this way, Chairperson. We need to standardize certain procedure, because it may be that you visit the tax office and they will facilitate doing it for you. And maybe that you
you may be correct, and this is the problem, and this is what happens in certain part of the problem in certain societies is some people can visit one time and get everything resolved. Another person going 5-6 times.
Okay, so
and that's not what. When you have those systems in place, you are going down the wrong road. And I'm just saying it's our job to make it as efficient as possible here in this parliament. And I have found that chances are when things are fairly simple, anytime anything in government get too complex, I start to wonder why. And I'm simply saying to you, in a situation like that, I start from the point of view, and members, look, at TCC is very important, but I would have suspected that tax that collect everything, that they would simply, if you're going to get a TCC, they would just look across their books, sign off. If they even wanted to go back to the agencies and double check, that's fine. But when they're sending people all around, to me it's just inefficient. It just cannot be the right way to go if we want ease of doing business. And somewhere in this conundrum, somebody has to be making a decision as to what must and must not be done. And I suspect it resides at the Ministry of Finance. And maybe we, Bailey, maybe one of the things committee we need to do is have that discussion with them. But I simply say it seems to me to be, and quite frankly, if, as you say, it is not so that persons can, then let me understand this. You're saying that to get the TCC, they can get are they to get the approval from you at the NIS office, or can they get it from tax where they're actually paying it?
All right, Chair. I'm on a committee that deals with amalgamation, and one of the issues up is the same issue we're speaking about, TCC. And I must say probably it's in the parking lot now, which where we need to take it over and revise it, look at it going forward. Because the whole plan and the framework is, as we are speaking about, you go to the collectorate because that is the agency that collects on behalf of the government. And from there, all of the necessary is done. So we probably need to take it out of the parking lot.
Which committee is this?
It's TAJ, tax compliance certificate, so if you want.
It's a TAJ. Is a TAJ.
Ministry of Finance, TAJ.
And they meet with all of you?
We have met for a while.
Oh dear. Members, is this something that, I mean, as I said, we are efficiency of government. Is this something that we need to follow up on and just certainly invite the entire committee? Who sits on the committee? TAJ, yourself, NHT, who else would be on it?
All the stats body, all the stat body. NIS, NHT, TAJ, ETAX, Art.
A heart, obviously. Cool. All right, members, I think that I don't think it would take long, but let us invite them, the entire committee, to come and sit with us, just to see if we can unravel some of this maze and make things a little more simple.
And it's the amalgamation committee, Chairman, and you recall the
SO. Oh, that's the name of it, amalgamation.
Because you recall the SO2 form that was introduced some years ago, where all the deductions are now done on this one standardized form. That was part of the process. That was one of the outcomes of the work of the committee. So it needs to further.
As I said, and quite frankly, I think that how quickly we can get, one of the things that I found with NHT, especially the refund, maybe 8-10 years ago, all of a sudden information started to go, get your refund. Now, right down the system, people are just very involved doing it, but it took a period. Yeah. Now it's almost an automatic thing. I think that what we're trying to do is to get that computerization process in place and an information process in place for the general public. Tell me, when do you expect to roll out your computerized processes? Do you have a time frame on it?
It's Chairman, it's ongoing. So we have so far rolled out 4 modules, and the last module, which is to be rolled out, should be completed by the end of this financial year.
What is a module? I'm not certain if it's spatial, if you're talking 4 parts of Jamaica, or 4 different areas, or I don't know what the module is.
So one module would be, for example, your NIS registration. Members of Parliament, I'm not sure if the new members of Parliament, but you recall, I think about, was it 2017? I believe it was, when the minister was speaking in Parliament, we issued all the MPs with new NIS cards. You remember that?
Yes.
That was part of the process. So the first module, so it's following the NIS process. The first module was revamping how we did registration and to get your NIS number, right? So that was the first module. The card was revamped. That was a module. Second module would have been contribution, meaning getting that contribution information into the system. A third module would have been claims, which is the processing of benefits. And the other module, payments, because from claims come payment, right? And so we are now, Chairman.
So your fifth is?
So the fourth, which is, the fourth is just payments, and the fifth, which is compliance. Compliance now is the information from the companies coming in and linking that to the individual contribution records, right? And ensuring that the companies are paying over what they're supposed to pay over. That is once that module is finished, our intention is to take a lot of that information that is in there online, because we want every contributor to become their own police, monitoring the contributions that are being paid over.
And Noble, I think that's good, and obviously it would mean that you'd be a real sense of interconnectivity.
Right.
But do you have a time frame?
Yes. So that module is to be completed at the end of this financial year. They're in the process of developing that module.
So around next year this time, I can take my card that you gave me 2 years ago and I can go online and find out whether or not I have a pension.
All things being equal, Chairman.
All right. Okay, so yes. All right, members. All right, members. Let me just say, I'm going to. We've really just hit the first two issues with the Ministry of Labor. I'm going to move now to PATH, but it is looking, PS, I don't think we're going to be able to complete. It just looks to me almost impossible, because I'd heard things coming up, work permits, the overseas employment program. A number of these things are important.
I thought we finished overseas employment. Huh? Chairman, I thought we did overseas employment the last time I was here. Extensively.
Okay. All right. Well, let us push ahead. PATH. The PATH program, you want to give us a...
Well, the PATH program, Chairman, we currently, at the end of the 2018-19 financial year, I mean, I don't need to tell persons what PATH is, but at the end of the financial year, we had just about 343,000 registered beneficiaries on the program, and this spanned 130,000 families. 66% of the beneficiaries are children. You will recall that the focus of the program is, while we're providing a social benefit, the focus really is trying to break that intergenerational cycle of poverty by investing in the children. So 66% of the beneficiaries are children, 23% are elderly, which is another very important group. This year, we have just over 7.4 billion, and I must point out, Chairman, there was an error where we have budget allocation and expenditure. Those figures are in thousands. So I think if you read it, it would say 7.9 million, it's 7.9 billion. So it's in thousands. All of the figures are in thousands. So just add 3 more zeros to all of those figures. So we have a number of benefits on the PATH. Last year we introduced a new allowance, which we call the back to school allowance, where children in school receive $3,500 as a one-off grant to assist with back to school expenses. We have our other grants, our post-secondary grants, which we assist children making that transition into other training institutions, because we know that you can't end at high school. You need to go on, you need to get a skill, or you need to be certified. We have the Steps to Work program, targeting PATH families, where we work with families to try and get them into the labor force. We're not content with just providing benefits. We need to provide or assist families with the means so that they can get into the labor force, whether they may need training or retraining, micro grants, and so forth. One of the things that we reintroduced last year, Chairman, we had them before, we used to call them PATH days, but we reintroduced what we call the community engagement series last year. And last year we did just about 65 communities last year, where we had outreach activities within the communities trying to get close to beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries of the program, and that will continue this year. This year we're going to be increasing that from 65 with an additional 25 communities to be targeted for that intervention. We have our Path Parenting Program, which is a pilot that we have been doing with the support of the IDB, where we are trying to provide families with parenting skills. So that's a pilot that we've been working with the National Parenting Commission on that particular activity. This year, Chairman, we have in our budget $8.3 billion, which has been budgeted for PATH, and of that, $7.4 billion will be spent on cash grants. Last year, the budget was $7.9 billion, so there's been a year-over increase in the allocation.
Sister?
Chair, through you to the Permanent Secretary. PS, while I want to commend the program, the PATH program, has been really assisting some of our poor and vulnerable in the society. But I still have some concerns here. There are a number of persons who have been complaining that they have been dropped off the program. They were on it. Their situations have not improved over the years. What would have caused them to have dropped off the program? And there are still a number of persons who they very poor and vulnerable, destitute persons. I was in my constituency on Monday evening, visited a number of homes. Persons, when you look at the situation, you wonder how can people survive. And they have applied to get on the program, and several times, and they have not been getting onto the program. And I know that this is widespread. We need some intervention there. I don't know if you would need to get some more officers, to some field officers to get out there to do the assessment. And we have also been asking for the criteria to be revisited, because we have been saying where persons have water closet, they have a refrigerator, they have a stove, and yet still they can't buy food, they can't buy medication, and they are not getting onto the program because of this. So we have been asking, civil society has been asking for the longest while also for the criteria to be revisited. I have another concern as it relates to, maybe we need to, the Ministry of Labor and Ministry of Education, you need to have some sort of collaboration, because we have somewhere in the region of 50% of the school population are on the PATH program. In many of the cases, the program says that, from the Ministry of Education's point of view, that once you're on the PATH program, you're not required to pay a school fee. They don't pay a school fee, and yet those students who benefit, the schools have a shortfall in terms of their revenue. I don't know what collaborative approach there between the Ministry of Education and the PATH. What can be done to alleviate these schools that are really carrying the burden over the years with their shortfall?
Well, member, we collaborate very closely with the Ministry of Education. As a matter of fact, the budget for the school feeding program is prepared when we submit information to the Ministry of Education saying how many children are on the program and the indicative numbers for schools, and that's how the Ministry of Education prepares its budget. As it relates to the school fees, it is a policy of the government that children who are on PATH are not required to pay the tuition fees. I believe, I don't want to, please don't quote me on this, but I know that some time ago, the ministry, so that was tuition. However, there was still the requirement that they needed to pay all the other fees, because we know the school fees comprise of tuition fees and what they call auxiliary fees. And some time ago, the Ministry of Education said that when it comes on to the PATH beneficiaries, that they will take up that portion of the fees. So it is something that I will take your recommendation and we will have further discussions with the Ministry of Education if it is said that, you know, that there are children who are still being required to pay these fees when that is a government policy that they should not be required to pay these fees. As it relates to the selection criteria, there is no one variable or no one factor that causes you not to be selected. Well, let me correct myself. If you are a tertiary graduate, then chances are you will not get onto the PATH program. So I can say that it may be a factor that will hinder you from qualifying for PATH. But having indoor water closets and some of the other things that you spoke about are not indicators that are going to prevent you from getting on PATH. What happens, Chairman, and it is the selection criteria was developed by the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and what is done is we look at the data and you look at what are the factors that correlate with poverty. So we know that large households tend to be poor. We know that households that have a lot of children and elderly persons also tend to be poor. We know that households that live in the rural areas, there's a higher probability that they're going to be a poor household, right? We also know that if someone squats, that they are more likely to be poor. So there's a whole range of variables that go into a pot, so to speak, that determines eligibility. Now, we know that criteria, it's not foolproof. You're going to have errors of inclusion and you're going to have errors of exclusion, meaning you're going to have persons who are identified as poor when they're really not poor, and you're going to have persons who should be included that were excluded because of their situation, because it is in fact a mathematical formula which can't get into some of the nuances. But that is where we have the appeals committee within the parishes, where if someone was not selected, then they can go through the appeals process. Now that process looks more now at more qualitative information on the family. And that is, you know, in a long shell or a big shell, the selection criteria. But we hear you that we need to revisit it. I want to assure you the last time it was revisited was 2017 was the last time the selection criteria was revisited, and it is something that is constantly revisited. I think the 2017 would have been the third or fourth iteration of the selection methodology. But member, can I encourage you though, that the ministry tries to have a good relationship with our MPs, right? And so if there are persons within your community, your area, that you feel should be included on PATH that are not included, please tell us. We can work with you to see how we can have one of those community engagement series within your community, and you can help us to bring those persons together where we can actually do the targeting right there in the community, or you send their names to us and we will see how we can work it.
Well, that is being done because I have a very good relationship with Ms. Royal, your manager in Manchester. Excellent lady to work with. But you did not answer the part that a number of the other persons who were previously on the path, they have been excluded. And
dropped off the list.
Dropped off the list, and their situations have not improved. What would have caused that?
Well, Chairman and members, we have a process which we have rolled out last year, which we call graduation. We have persons who have been on path since its inception, 2002, to today, 17 years. And so we rolled out a process whereby persons who have been on path from 2002 up to 2009?
More than 4 years.
Persons who have been on the program between 2002 up to 2009, they were written to and asked to come back to us to be re-evaluated, right? They were written to, notices were placed, and thing. Some persons came back, some persons did not. Now we had to take a decision. What do we do? Do you continue to keep persons who have been on this program for 17 years because they did not take the initiative, but they came and collected the check? They didn't take the initiative to come back to us, even though we have told them you need to come in to be reassessed. My circumstances have certainly changed over the last 17 years, right? So person's circumstances can also change. And we don't want to be in a situation where we have persons who are genuinely no longer deserving of the benefit being on the program. And so we did send out some communication to persons advising them that they need to come in, failure to come in, that their benefit will cease. And we have further sent out another set of communication that there are some persons who will stop receiving benefit as of this month.
I think though.
No,
just a
remember,
follow.
you're finished?
Yeah, just a follow.
All right.
The situation there, though, that they would have been dropped off the list without their situation being improved. That is my concern.
But they can come in, you know, member. And I mean, we do, even though we have notified persons that they didn't come in, and so we assume that they don't see themselves no longer as needing the benefit. We do provide the option that if they come back to us, we will facilitate and do the reapplication process for the program, or the reassessment process.
So your suggestion to the persons who come to us and say they are being dropped off the list.
They need to come to us.
There are two questions we'd ask. Number one, did you get a letter to go and re-verify? And if so, did you go?
Right.
And secondly, if they did not go, well, we have to encourage them to go. And
Right.
if they did go, then it means that the evaluation has found them in a different position. Right. And then that now goes to the appeals.
Right.
Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Yes, what I was saying.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, what I was saying is that there are some challenges with respect to the letters, because a number of persons may not have received the letters. A number of persons get the letters and don't understand, because they come to me and say, MP, me get a letter saying me not on the program again. That kind of thing, they don't understand the contents of the letter. So you have that challenge, plus some of them don't get the letter any at all, because some of these persons are persons who are really shut-ins and so on. People collect them letters and they don't get the letter. Some of them just don't get the letters.
No.
Before you move on,
we're not removing, remember, any elderly persons.
Yeah, but they would have been. They would have found themselves in that position subsequent to the information that you would have had. For example, somebody, when you evaluate them, they were qualified but not disabled. They would have found themselves that maybe they got a stroke maybe 1 year ago, so they are now disabled and can't move. But you have them as your system, as able-bodied persons. That's right. So their circumstances would have changed in that respect.
Well, member, I would encourage you to help us to identify those persons. However, many of those persons would have collected the checks.
But the question
So-
I was asked,
Yeah, but-
well, I think, remember with FMA, how do you notify them?
We notify them in writing. So
So what do you do?
every
So what do you
payment
do?
period, the payment is primarily done through using checks at the post offices,
And that's
and
it.
our communication with them is that medium.
So
So what
once
we
them
do, we
pick up-
actually
so you're
staple
saying
those
what-
notices to the checks.
So once them collect the check, you're saying
They
should
get the
have gotten
notice
the letter.
because it's stapled.
Yeah, but there are many times when these persons have bearers who collect for them. But the point I'm making though is that I think you could, because they will go to the post office. So I think the best way, because I think the letter, there is some problem with the letters. If you could put that list in at the various post offices. So if you have, for example, 100 letters for Junction, you could put it, that was 100 names at the Junction post office. So that when they go, that listing is there to say, well, you need to come in, instead of sending out individual letters to them, or in addition to.
Yeah, well, remember, I must say that I don't know that every path person would want their name printed on the wall of the post office. You know, it
No,
might open up some persons to. Well, I'm not. Having heard, I believe that once a person gets a letter stapled to the check and the check is encashed, I suspect that you can take that as a reasonable assumption that they got some communication.
Yeah, but I know a lot of them who said they get a letter stating that they are not on the program anymore. That's how they interpret the letter. A lot of them.
Yeah. All right.
The letter encourages them to come in, though, you know. The letter encourages them to come in. But you know, remember, you are close to the people, and if you know, our systems, though we will try, there are going to be some persons who will not, who will be excluded, or they don't understand, and so forth. And so that is why, you know, they have you, and you can interface with us.
Member Dunn?
Yes, just to add my bit to the whole part thing, I mean, I believe it's a very good program, and we have seen in recent times where the benefit has even increased. And I mean, a number of my constituents, you know, has asked me to tell you guys thanks for this particular, for the increase. Don't want to be parochial, but there's a school called Richmond Road Primary School. Richmond Road Primary School that doesn't have the benefit of a school feeding
Program?
Yes, and it is something that I've tried to spoke to Ministry of Education about it. So I'm also bringing it to your attention, so you can look into it. That's Richmond Road Primary School. The other thing I want to make some contribution to is regard to the letters, because you have to remember who are the beneficiaries of PAT. And some of these persons, while they get the letter, they're so focused on that check that them tear off the letter and go and encash the check. Would it be too much to have the persons in the particular area from the PAT office to visit those persons? So in addition to the letter that is sent to them, would it be just too much?
I'm intrigued by that, Member Dunn. Just a question. Let us take, how many persons were evaluated? Because you were saying that obviously the children going to school aren't, and the elderly are not. So how many persons? You said this, you're just doing an exercise now.
Right.
In this last exercise, how many persons would you say were evaluated?
Over 30,000 families, 30 plus thousand families were
No.
re-evaluated.
All right, so these are persons who are on your record already.
Right.
Now, you're talking about what, 500 per constituency, roughly. I mean, it's a sizable number. I don't know if my math is correct, but
Some
but
parishes are large.
the question, yeah, we have 60 constituencies.
Yeah.
The question, though, is when they go in, these 30,000, what's the next phase? Is it that they just go in, answer some questions, leave, and everything is cool? Or is it that they're visited anyway?
When they come in and they visit, the selection criteria is reapplied, and at that point in time, they're told whether or not they will continue on the program or not.
So you're saying that these persons go in, visit the office, but nobody visits their place of abode?
It depends. It depends.
On what?
So, maybe Elsa, you can explain? I'll ask Ms. Marks Willis, who is more versed in this area, to explain.
No, because I'm,
Right, so when they come in with the relevant documentation and they do the reapplication process, at that point they are told whether they are provisionally approved or they're no longer eligible for PATH. And provisionally approved means that because the information that they provided is self-reported, someone will need to come and verify the information once they are to remain on the program. But if the score that they receive shows that they are no longer eligible for PATH, then they are told at that point that they will get an additional or 2 payments, 3 payments for, and then no longer benefit from the program.
So how many, so having everybody going, there are 30,000 people going, how many of them are visited after?
Well, it depends because we have about more than half of them to remain. So those would have to get a visit to verify the information.
So going back to the point that was made, it rather than have the 30,000 going to visit you and then coming back and then you visiting 15,000, maybe there's some merit to what Member Dunn says of having PATH just visit those that you have a question with, the 30,000, say. What would be the impediment to just visit those? Just visit everybody. Because you're creating a lot of work, I'm just saying.
In 2003, when we did a similar exercise and we had to visit all the families, and I think it was about 45,000 families at that time, it cost us about $30 million to do that. So what we found is that some persons we could reduce the cost plus the manpower that would be needed to visit all the relevant persons within a specific period of time, because it's also time sensitive as well.
All right. Look, what I would ask you to do for us is to sort of break this down into some pros and cons and what the costs are. Because if you're saying it costs, you did 45,000, it costs 30 million, you may be talking 10, 15 million. We have seen money spent in other areas. You're talking about persons who already are challenged financially. Many of them traveling distances to go and visit the office, all of that. And then if half of them you're going to go back and visit them anyway, let's just do a little cost-benefit analysis. If you could send something to us, we will look at it and it will help us to make our recommendation to Parliament. But based on what I'm hearing already with those who are not coming in, the process that has to happen, the difficulties, we would just like to be justified in our mind that the alternative route is not one that could be taken as well.
Chairman, in all of this, we have to remember who are the beneficiaries. I mean, they're there
and
because
the
they are challenged already.
So, something to think about. And quite frankly, just to say this, every summer we have summer work programs from many agencies. You have young persons, and one of the difficulties is I know that a lot of these agencies are having difficulty placing them, doing the work. Now, in some cases, recommendations were made for them to go and check the street lights because we needed an audit, different things. So I'm just saying, there are ways of rationalizing and getting government to work together. So I'm saying if this is something, we have just finished a program where many young people went out and did the vector control program. And I hear numbers, how many thousand people will be employed in the summer. If you have a program like this, it may be easy to just roll it out, and it is wide enough that the students across the length and breadth of the island would have some opportunity. And what you're asking them to do is really an empirical survey. We are hoping that what is being done is based, is not subjective. So it's something that can be done. We're just saying it's something to look at, given the persons we're dealing with.
Chairman, I'd just like to...
But Pierce, I don't know. I don't see you looking like you're committed to the process. We're talking, but what's your position on that? Do you have a...
Chairman, it is something we can look at. But, many times when you're dealing with persons and, personal information, we're a country that is very sensitive. And I'm not discounting and the suggestion. It's something we will look at, but it's not as simple as counting streetlights. You're talking to people, you're gathering information on their personal socioeconomic situation. In our dispensation, we use trained social workers to do that kind of thing. So I hear the suggestion. It is something we would really have to evaluate and look closely at. It's not as simple as taking high school students to go and do something like that. But I'm committing to look at it to see if there is a space where, we can look at how we use our young people more to assist us, and look at how we can probably do things differently. I will admit, sitting here, you did the math, and I was listening to you, and you said, what the numbers work out to approximately 500 per constituency. And I have said it before, I think that the MPs are a valuable resource, that your constituents use you, but I don't think we in the ministry use you enough. So I think we need to see how we can certainly utilize the members of parliament much closer to help us in achieving some of our objectives.
Carry on the chairman's point, and I quite agree with you, but I think he made a point that we use objective data in terms of the collection. I mean, no subjective. So in other words, you have to prioritize now the data that they are able to actually collect, not the sensitive one that you want, but the most important thing is going back to the letter. The fact that you have sent out the letter and stapled the letter to the checks and you're not getting the response. So if you utilize a program that the chairman is suggesting, the fact that the person visits the individual and says, look here.
Even the ones who say they did not.
Even the ones.
Persons you have not gotten a response from.
Right.
Even to send out to say, you need to come in. It's a start. I'm just saying, let's figure out how we can join up the government a little bit and get some programs as a start. Yeah. All right.
I need to just make an inquiry. You have you say you work with families. You work with families to help them to transition from this program. How successful have you been in helping families make, and what kind of measurements you use? Because you go send your social workers out there who are doing the assessment, and how many families have you would you say in the last year you were able to help to transition from their dependency on this program, where they get some wonderful sum of like how much did you say? How much is the weekly sum that they get? How the average family, how much does it get?
3,500.
That's what I'm getting. That's exactly what I'm getting.
The average family gets about 5,000 to 6,000. Average family, but we have families getting as much as 10,000. Because it depends.
Per
2 months, but it depends on the size of the family, because the benefit the family gets is dependent on the composition of the family.
Right. But what I really want to get at, because I have this suspicion that we, in an odd way, we are creating a certain level of dependency if we are not there to do the measurements and to help people to make the transition. So I want to really, that unit that is assisting in doing making the transition, how successful have they been in that?
Well, remember, I don't have that particular figure, but if I were to point you on page 6 of the report, which speaks to Steps to Work program, where in 2018-19, 779 clients received skills training. We have another 585 who got entrepreneurial grants, and another 567 who were placed in on-the-job training. So these are persons, and these figures represent most times families, because most times it's one person from a family that we're working with.
So and you have what, 343,000 families?
No, individuals.
342.
Right.
And
we have just about 130,000 families.
And you're saying of that you have been able to transition? Last year, transition 779. What percentage is that?
I don't have that percentage. I'd have to calculate it.
It's about 0.004%.
But that is 1 year, But that is 1 year.
Yeah.
Remember, this is an ongoing process.
Right. It's ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about moving people, transitioning people, there has to be a more serious measurement that we take, because I think there are greater levels of intervention. Would your ministry consider, for example, you have a family out there, it is sitting on 20 acres of land. Yeah? The family that you say, perhaps 5-6 people, they're sitting on 20 acres of land, or let's reduce it, 5 acres of land, owned by the family. Do you take that into consideration in doing your assessment as to whether those people are poor?
No.
You don't?
Mm-mm.
All right. May I just make a suggestion? Because you have people, they're sitting out there for the greater part in the rural parts, and they're sitting on unregistered land. For all practical purposes, the law will tell you how, if the grandfather left it to them, how it is supposed to be distributed if he didn't, and all of that. That it could very well be that you as a body go out there and assist them with making that transition by having those lands brought under the registration.
But that, while we will help to guide the family as to what they need to do and where they need to go, there is a program, the LAMP program.
The lamp is out. The oil has burnt. And
But
the wick,
remember,
and the wick
remember,
needs trimming.
land. Remember, I can't be. all things to all persons. And so while we will try and tell them where to go, where to access certain services,
PS, you will continue to pay out these exorbitant sums. You are paying out at the minute $8.3 billion of taxpayers' money. And to say that it is not a serious consideration to look to helping to make the transition, and not, if we are going to attack poverty at its root, we must say to and do whatever we can, and not just be out there to hand out cash. There are other areas where we can go, and we'll say to the families, listen, you are saying, I've had the experience of being in my office, and I see a young lady who's at medical school, and she wants assistance. And the last thing I have in my education fund is $50,000, and I'm doing the letter to send off to the SDC. And when I said, don't your parents, your family have land? Yes, sir, but a family land. Not me, sir. There's nothing we can properly describe as family land. It belongs to somebody's estate. And I'm just saying, in furtherance of your objectives, you're saying you're helping these families to transition. And there are other state agencies which, of course, you can dovetail with and to help you to achieve it. And so I'm just saying, in sending out your social workers out there who helping you to collate the data and to make the assessment, to factor it into the matrix so that you can more properly help them to make the transition from, on this side we say, from poverty to prosperity.
All right. Member Clark?
Thank you very much, sir. Question to PS. Let's say you have done your assessment of a family and you found that you have a mother, single mother with 4 kids, and rightly so they get on the PATH program. And another year or 2 you go and you make the assessment and you see an addition of another child. How do you view that situation?
Well, member, if that mother has another child, that mother can come into our office and add that child, and the family will then begin getting an additional benefit for that child.
So, Mr. Chairman, you understand where we're going now, because we are, rather than helping them to become independent, we're actually creating a sense of dependency, because there's nothing that is going to tell that mother that, okay, I need to get up and fend for myself. The government is already going to provide, and what the PS just said to me without even hesitating tells me that it don't give them the urge to say that I want to get off PATH program.
Yeah.
No, member, to be fair to me, you asked me a specific question.
I know, and that's why I asked it like that.
But I told you that we work with the families because we are trying to transition them. Capable members of that household, if we weren't working with the families to provide them with skills training, right? Entrepreneurial grants, on-the-job training, if we weren't doing all of that, and we weren't helping them with the transition grants to get them to transition from high school into other training institutions. If we weren't doing all of that, I would agree with you. But we're doing all of that for this very purpose, that we believe in empowering persons so that they can make the transition. One of the things I must point out is that we have in 2018, introduced a case management approach for all new families coming onto PATH. So when a family comes onto PATH for the first time, we take them through, I'm going to use the term a triage assessment, so to speak, where we look at the family, right? And we try to come up with some kind of plan for the family. You look at the family, right? You may see somebody who comes in, they qualify for the program, but when you look at the information, they're a high school graduate, right? Can we work with them to provide them with directing them into a heart training program? Or do they have a skill, for example, that if we provide them with a micro grant, that they would be able to hone that skill and establish their own small business? So that is something that we have, we're rolling out for new families coming onto the program.
Right.
So if we weren't doing all of that, remember, I would agree with you, but
Mr.
I
Chairman,
can't agree with you.
And I'm not blaming the ministry. I understand what the ministry is doing. But what I'm saying, or what I'm trying to get across, Mr. Chairman, is the fact that here's a mother who has 4 children, single parent. But between the time that they were placed on path and when you go back for your assessment, a man coming to the picture and create another baby. And I'm saying we have to.
We would be accused of discrimination if we don't assist that family, or
No, but in assisting, we could do some meaningful education to say that you are in a situation. Try not to get to that point that you know burden yourself even more on the system that is trying to assist you. That is really my line of argument. Nothing else.
And I think what we're getting at may be a bit unfair for PS. I think that it's something in the report. I think it's something to discuss, because I think where you're going at it is that this whole thing has to be seen in the light of a term she used earlier, a poverty cycle, and what happens with large families, etc., etc. So the question is, how do we try and break the cycle? What are the policies we put in place? That's what I'm getting out of that discussion. And I think what we need to do possibly is to make recommendations. These are policy decisions far more than they are. If I may protect.
But the data doesn't show us that, though.
Doesn't show you what?
No, it doesn't show us that there is an incentive. That path is an incentive to having children. As a matter of fact, the numbers on the program in terms of pregnant and lactating women, because we do provide a benefit for pregnant and lactating women, is less than 2,000 beneficiaries out of the 340 something thousand. So it's a point. What, Mr. Campbell? A mathematician. 0.00.
Member Dunn.
Yes, Chairman. PS, when persons are being placed on path, is a transition program discussed with them at that particular point in time?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it is done with new families now. But if I must admit that from 2002, when we had the inception of the program, families were told that after 4 years you would be reassessed. Families were also told, right, or families are told, but I'm just making the point that it started from the inception of PATH. And families are told that if your socioeconomic circumstances change and you're no longer deemed to be in need of the benefit, then the benefit would be removed. It just so happens that this is the first time we have been moving towards it.
I'm trying to get at, Chairman, if this was discussed with the beneficiary at that point in time, is there someone that works with the beneficiaries throughout the 4-year period, so to speak, to ensure that a transition in fact takes place?
That's a case management.
So what I pointed out earlier was that in 2018, when we introduced the case management approach for new families coming on path, so that is where we are going, because what we did was many years we didn't do that kind of thing. We had other interventions that came in that we started to work with families long after they're on the program. Now what we're doing is from the outset, when you come onto the program, there's a case management that is done, a resiliency. We look at the family, we call it a resiliency matrix, where you look at different things related to the family, right? And you then use that to sort of develop a plan for the family with them.
All right. Pierce, I have the marshal hovering to the left. All right. Every week, one of the days I'm going to lock the door. But before there are a couple of things, and I'm going to take them. But before you go, I indicated by oversight. I didn't mention it at the time in this national, in the fund, the Melia Hotel. You can give us a quick update on it, or yeah. Huh? You think that we have to put it off? Well, all right. All right. Let me. I'm guided between member Clark and the marshal. Where's the agenda? The today's. Okay.
Yes, in the meantime,
Yeah, all right.
have you ever had anybody who would come into the office and voluntarily say our circumstances have improved?
Unfortunately, member people don't do that. As a matter of fact, you know what this particular exercise...
voluntarily come off?
No.
No.
What this exercise has shown us is that we have some persons who really, when they eventually come in to us and we find out why they didn't come in, we have responses like we were overseas on vacation. And that just reinforces that, you know, they need, yeah, exactly.
All right. Piers, the issues we have here, I know you had said work permits were done, but there were the overseas. No. I'm moving on now. I'm closing. What I'm going to suggest, next week we're going to begin education. The only thing we have left is the social intervention program, productivity center, the work permits, and I said the overseas employment. We don't need the entire team. And what I'm really hoping, member, and of course the discussion, an update on Melia. And what I would suggest, if we can just do it first, and then if we can finish. Oh, sorry. Yes. I'm not hearing. No, that's. Oh.
Sorry. I'm going to be out on duty travel.
Okay, so can we, and the following week we don't meet, right? All right, so what we'll do is set it maybe 2 weeks from now?
Yes, we can be.
No, it can't be. I'm saying next week we're meeting with education. The following week we'll not be meeting. So it would have to be sometime in July.
Right, okay.
And coming to the end of the before Parliament prorogues. But what we would do is just ask, and let's see if we could just take the first hour of the meeting and dispose of the matters. Could we get there's a social intervention program.
It was in this report.
Yes, I see, but we don't really have much information on it. I suspect maybe some demographical breakdown might be useful, just to see how it is, because I think it's an important program, but I'm not quite certain where and how.
So you need demographical breakdown?
Yes.
Demographic mean age
with
group?
National or geographical.
Geographic. Okay,
yeah.
That's why.
All right, and what we can do is I'll have the.
We can give you by parish.
Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. No. All right, so members, on that note, let me thank the wider ministry. I think it's been for me, a very informative and useful meeting. There are some things for us to follow up, some short term, some more long term. We will try and see you within, I think it's going to be like another 3 weeks, just to tidy up before whatever meeting. And members, I refuse to be drawn. I refuse to be drawn. So members, next week we will take the education. The following week we break, and then when we resume, it would be local government. We'll select some of the issues to start with, but with local government, but we will factor in that we will see labor. All right, PS, travel safe, and to the rest of your team, thank you. I think members have been well informed today. Members, thank you. Meeting is now adjourned.